Listen and subscribe to the GrowthCraft Startup Community Podcast on all the major podcast players, including iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere where podcasts are available. And leave a 5-star review if you like it. We need those reviews to grow the show, and it's the easiest way to help us grow the show that you can do right now. So head on over to iTunes, head on over to Google Podcasts or Spotify, and leave a 5-star review for the GrowthCraft Startup Community Podcast. And tell all of your friends who are entrepreneurs to take a listen. And thanks. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells. This over here is Tom Living.
Welcome back, everyone.
And you are listening to the GrowthCraft Podcast. The GrowthCraft podcast is designed with the startup founder in mind. This podcast, this thing that you're experiencing right now in your ears, is committed to growing your connections to our GrowthCraft advisors, increasing your engagement overall with the GrowthCraft community, and to growing your knowledge about all of the benefits that GrowthCraft can provide for your startup project. We can't wait to bring you along on our journey today. Now, here on the podcast, we interview startup founders, advisors, and others about their journey, their process, their project, and of course, about all of the value that GrowthCraft can provide to them, and in some cases, the value they provide to GrowthCraft. And today, I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Charlie Pascal. How you doing, Charlie?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. So, for our listeners, for our viewers, for those watching on YouTube or whatever platform they may happen to be watching it on, or listening on whatever device they may happen to be listening on, tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do exactly?
Well, as you noted, maybe you didn't note yet, I'm an attorney, and I've been practicing law for about 15 years now, the last decade of which has been focused almost exclusively on the startup community, often referred to as ECVC. I've represented emerging companies and venture capitalists for some time, and really enjoy this industry in that it's super exciting, it's fast, it's an incredible experience to be, often, the third or fourth or sixth member of an early team, and being involved at the ground level. It gives me kind of saved me from exiting the legal practice, which otherwise can be tremendously boring.
So you actually just answered what my question was going to be, Charlie. So I was going to ask you what, because we typically ask people what the catalyst is, like what starts this for you, about going into your venture, and for you being an attorney. I really wasn't interested in finding out why you became an attorney, but why the focus on startups was going to be intriguing to me. But you seem to have answered that a little bit. So I'm going to spin it just slightly and ask you, why would you venture out on your own versus staying with a larger firm? Because I know our audience doesn't know this yet, but you've recently decided to go out on your own and start your own firm, which I commend you for, because I think that's a tremendous leap of faith on your part. But why now, and why that leap of faith, and what prompted you to do that, to start rather than staying with a bigger firm?
Sure. So after gaining very valuable experience in building very solid and continuing relationships with lawyers at the firms I've been at. Most recently at the law firm that I just left, I had focused primarily on, more of a traditional approach that lawyers used to kind of take in building their own practice within the firm. It still largely is the case, but I built up a number of client relationships that were very strong, and I was really the only or the primary point person that they were working with. So it was a very personal relationship, I would say, with me, guiding their enterprises. And now, to some degree, I don't know if it's a little bit of FOMO or just drinking the startup Kool-Aid for so long, but it's pretty infectious. And the idea of having more independence, both in terms of how I like to operate, as a legal advisor, as well as to in turn benefit the clients, largely in terms of post-COVID. Not having to have overhead for office space or employ full-time staff. There's a lot of ways to connect clients with the appropriate advisors without having them be a part of one firm or another. So a lot of what I do, I'm really a general corporate. You think of me as outside counsel or outside general counsel to companies, and at certain points, I do need expertise, specialized, attorney guidance, whether it be tax or intellectual property, or FDA regulation, stuff like that. When that time is appropriate, and I need that additional guidance for the client and myself, I will bring in folks, typically, those that I've known and worked with from prior firms that I know I can trust and that they're going to deliver a level of service similar to my own. But being able to limit that to the instances in which it makes sense and is necessary, I can both limit, my overhead and the client's budget as well. So, some of these, depending on the reason for bringing them in, they might be, very expensive lawyers at top firms that I wouldn't normally encourage a client to work with, just because the rates are pretty consistent across firms, and they can be very, very high no matter what lawyer you're working with. So by sort of turning the whole which firm do you need to work with to having sort of like a quarterback, much like a general counsel at a company, whether it's public or private, they do the same things. They're there to kind of make sure everything's overall kind of from the macro level, that things are operating correctly, that you're governing the company properly, et cetera. And then when there's a lawsuit or, there's, again, a specialized need, they'll call on outside lawyers to come in and help them with the issue.
So that brings up another question that we typically ask later, but I'm going to go ahead and ask now because, well, we kind of opened the door to this question. So, right, yeah. This is how it begins. First there's oohing, and there's eyeing, and then there's running, there's screaming. I love Jeff Goldblum. All right, anyway, so when we think about the ways in which lawyers interact with clients, right? Lawyers and doctors are similar in obviously different in a number of ways, but they're similar in one basic way. No one really wants to call them until they got a problem. And then when they do call them, they want the problem solved as quickly as possible. So describe for us, obviously without, damaging confidentiality or anything like that, or ethics and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not dismissing ethics, but you know what I mean. What are some typical problems that you will see or that you have encountered in the course of the last 15 years with startups or individuals who are going into the startup realm, who are starting their own projects? That's an A question. And the B question is, how do you resolve those problems when you're asked to come in?
Sure. Well, much like a physician or other, doctor, I'd say you kind of do need to be on call all the time. There are emergencies that need to be dealt with immediately and proactively. However, my strategy is more to get founders and executive teams comfortable with keeping me in the conversation, whether it be through attending board meetings or executive meetings, and kind of being trusting that because they're communicating with me about what's going on and what they're thinking, that they shouldn't be fearful of the bill running up, that those are more business level strategy type discussions. And the reason I take that approach is to as best I can, to head off those potential emergencies or those crises before they ever come up. So, in a lot of cases, it's rare that, there's truly something that comes out of nowhere that we shouldn't have anticipated and been planning for. So even if it comes up at a time when we weren't expecting it, we should have contemplated the potential issue, whether it be a breach of contract or an executive leaving or something like that, and that we have talked about the different ways in which we would handle that, and we're more prepared. But in general, I try to be as involved as possible in regular goings on at a company, so that I can kind of chime in and say, well, but what did you think about this potential consequence? And that often sparks a larger discussion of ways to either mitigate or maybe alter course a bit. It's not normally a no, don't do that, or you can't do that, but it's let's think through 3 steps down the road, based on experience I've had with others. So that's really the way I kind of handle damage control. It's sort of on the front end, and hopefully less on the back end.
So well, first of all, I just want to make sure, I want to make a statement here. I was always told that there's only 2 people you never ever lie to, and those are the 2 people that you guys just brought up, your doctor and your lawyer. Everybody else can go fry, but those 2 people you never lie to. Anyway, and I still find that to be true, by the way. On all the interactions I've ever had with an attorney, I feel I got to tell them everything, right? Sometimes they know too much, but but I wanted to talk a little bit about something, a little bit of a left turn and a little bit of a backup because I thought Hasan was going to go in this direction with this last question. Not that it wasn't a good one, Hasan, it was a good question, but I got a different one, because the name of your new firm, and I'll let you tell everybody what the name of the firm is in a second, but it leads me to think that it's not strictly legally based, right? Like that you're going to open up the spectrum a little bit and help companies with well, quite honestly, the way I look at it, it doesn't really matter what they have a problem with. As long as they tell you what the problem is, you can help them find the solution. Can you talk a little bit about the company name and what that really entails from a holistic perspective for a startup?
Sure. So the firm is called Pascal Advisory, and I deliberately picked a name that was somewhat ambiguous. Not that my name isn't important, but that it's not traditional, sort of law firm lingo, because my approach is very close to what you were sort of hinting at. It's more of an overall advisory concept, in that, I think too often, and part of it's the way, the culture and law school and the way you kind of come into the profession, but that it's, lawyers see themselves as being limited to addressing legal questions and with, somewhat concrete answers. And for me, it's particularly with a startup, it's messy, it's fast, it's always, there's always curveballs. And to sort of bifurcate your relationship with the client to be call me when you have a legal need is not only not as productive as it could be, but is somewhat detrimental. Working with hundreds of early companies over the years, I've learned a lot about not only how to structure or document certain transactions, but also why certain business choices or missteps happen and what the fallout is. So I try to bring not only my legal experience, but that and as a general business advisor to the equation, so that it's, and in fact, I when people do come to me and say, hey, can you just look at this contract quickly? It's always stop, I need to know how this fits into the overall organization. How big of a spend is this? How important is this relationship, right? Because I can't in a vacuum, I can go and check the boxes and, yep, governing law is right, this and that, the parties' names are right, blah, blah, blah. But without understanding what the purpose is and what the hopeful short and long-term goals of that potential, business relationship or transaction is, I can't, really evaluate it and provide the same kind of advice I would if I had the other pieces of the puzzle. So, a lot of people want to, get off the phone as quickly as possible or keep the email to just, hey, give this a quick flip and get back to me. But that's not something I like to do. And it's, in the beginning, it's a bit challenging to coach clients to be comfortable with, deciding to pick up the phone rather than to avoid it. Because getting the lawyers, it means something's wrong or that it's going to be really expensive. And over time, people get more comfortable and understand that I like to think that my input on an issue that may not be technically legal or legally implicit in what they're trying to do, that I can bring certain advice and real world examples to the conversation, which I think brings a lot more value.
Join us online via Zoom at the GrowthCraft Startup Community Founders Forum each third Tuesday of the month at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Look, advisors and founders, we're all in this together. Building relationships with your peers in entrepreneurship is just as important as connecting with experts and advisors. Each month, every third Thursday, we'll meet online via Zoom to share ideas, get support each other, and talk about universal issues that nearly all startups share. We'll celebrate our victories, chat about challenges, and then break out into small groups to address a timely topic of interest. It's a great way to meet like-minded entrepreneurs. Check out the links to the third Tuesday events on the GrowthCraft website and join us at the GrowthCraft Startup Community Founders Forum in the show notes below the podcast player you're listening to right now. So speaking of value, the next question I'm going to ask you, again, a little bit off sort of where we would normally go, but something that you brought up there in talking about contracts and in context and addressing client concerns in a particular context, that you can give them a full range of advisory services and provide them a full range of advice, right? I'm going to ask this question out of my own personal background. So I'm trained in conflict resolution and reconciliation and negotiation work. Done a lot of divorce and family mediations, done a lot of negotiation work and coaching with folks in a business context and in an interpersonal context. And usually those two contexts overflow, particularly in a startup where the emotions are, to your point, high. Things are moving very, very quickly. And sometimes the people that are hired to work in a startup or are coming alongside that project are people where the relationship was built first and the business came second. Mm-hmm. I can talk about challenges that I've seen with negotiation. The biggest one being people often don't know how to negotiate because they don't know what to ask for. But talk a little bit about, if you would, sort of what you see in negotiation, what you have seen in your experience, and how should a startup founder approach negotiation, even from that first client interaction, or even sooner than that, in that first co-founder maybe interaction.
Sure. I think generally, relationships, particularly in startups, it does start as, it's a roommate or a school friend, or professor. You have what starts as kind of just a neat idea or what if, and all of a sudden things, you're a year later and it's like, oh wait, we didn't talk about who's getting what equity, or now this thing's got some legs. What comes next, and that can spark some troubles in the personal relationship, as well as that of the organization. And so, much like I would approach a negotiation on behalf of a client or together with a client, first, I think it's important to limit the adversarial nature of it as much as possible. A lot of lawyers like to tout that, they're they're going to fight, and they're going to argue for every last ounce. That's not always productive, and it can not only drag out time and expenses, but it can either kill or delay the business arrangement that needs to happen fairly quickly. So especially if I'm on the other side of with a lawyer that has that similar mentality, it gets harder when they want to kind of lock horns. But I try to approach it as, hey, we're both, but our clients want to get this done, and they both see it as an interest to both organizations. We need to work together to push this forward as smoothly and productively as we can. Certainly there's going to be issues that need to be worked through. There's going to be certain discussions that are going to take a slightly more serious and adversarial tone, but limiting those instances to the ones in which your client's best interest really rests, and sifting out the smaller ones that while the contract could be tighter, or you could have more representations or warranties from one side or the other. And this goes to also understanding the more global context of where that contract or joint venture relationship is headed. And so if you understand your client's major goals of that contract or that transaction, then I can take a more of a an amicable approach to the horse trading, so to speak, where I let the stuff go that because the trouble with trying to fight for everything is that you sort of lose credibility on the stuff that you really care about. And so by sort of saying, look, all your changes are fine, but I really have an issue with the indemnification clause, or what have you, can sort of give me that extra credibility that, well, they're just asking for this one thing, right? And but I see it as a big win for the client, because I've taken the time to understand what is important in terms of things potentially going sideways and how that could impact them.
I was always told that there's only two ways that a negotiation should end. Either both parties are really happy, or both parties are really upset. If there's anything else, then it didn't work. Right? Like, if both parties are equally upset, you probably did a good job.
You probably
both
did a
parties
good
are
job.
equally happy, you probably did a good job. But so Charlie, so let me turn this a little bit more personal for you. Like, so most people would talk about lawyers, and I hate the term dime a dozen, but let's just say there's a lot of attorneys out there. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity for people to pull up Google and say, I need an attorney near me, and they get a list of 20, 30, 50, whatever that number is. So why you? Why would somebody want to work with you? Like, why are you the best choice for specifically the startups? Because I know that's where you're hyper focused. So why is a startup better off choosing you over other attorneys that are available out there?
Well, I'd start by saying I can almost
Aside
assure
from
you
the fact that you're awesome, I don't want to, I mean, let's just get past that one. I'm just
the awesome factor and the beard pretty much.
The beard, yes, because when you shaved that off, it really struck me as odd. But whatever,
Yeah,
we'll move past that.
I'll start by saying, I'm not the best fit for every startup. I'm not the right match for every founding team, for every industry. And to your sort of opening with open the yellow pages, or I guess the Google pages now, I would try not starting from that point if you can, because the way almost everybody finds me is that they're recommended to them by someone in the community who has worked with me, whether as a client or even on the opposite sides of deals. Often because I try to be as involved as possible in the governance of the company, that that's appreciated to a level that even someone on the other side of a deal or a contract appreciates that things there weren't as many speed bumps as they expected, that I wasn't laying down on the tracks for every little issue. But I would say, test your network, or feel out your network, try to start, the sort of the roadmap of, hey, who do you know that might, have a good, corporate type attorney. And they say, well, I don't know for sure, but my buddy, did a startup, and maybe talk to him. And, I'm in Boston. I mean, I have clients in Europe and California and Texas. But primarily it's, it's a smaller community here in Boston. And as you go through your career, you cross a lot of paths, and hopefully you don't burn bridges. And you've got a reputation. Whether it be, again, client, organic client referrals, or from other professionals that I rely on. It's not just a legal network. It's accountants, it's marketing consultants. It takes a village, so to speak, and it's certainly not just lawyers. And the less lawyers, probably the better, in terms of startup, speed and friction and all that. So no, am I the best? No, and certainly personalities matter a lot. When I have my initial, kind of intake conversations with clients, if I don't feel that the rapport is right, or that, it's all about cost, or it's all about, I'm only going to, call you when, there's a clear legal, issue, or we get sued or something, it's probably not the right match. You give it a chance, but sometimes it's better to identify that it's just like any other relationship. You're, to some degree, you're kind of getting married, you're going along with the venture, you're taking a risk to some degree. Startup clients are often bootstrapping, money's tight, and for me it's the long game. And sometimes that long game means I'm successful on the client's next venture. These things always don't work out, and often they don't. So, building that solid, relationship in the beginning, and knowing the client has the same, or is aligned with sort of the view of how the relationship is going to go forward is very important to me. And so I would say, when I am the right fit, it's because there's a consensus on sort of the relationship of corporate counsel to the company. And, whether it be, fees or some other issue, we'll deal with them. We'll figure out, if we need to defer things, or agree to disagree on certain points. But there's got to be an implicit level of trust somewhat from the beginning. And if that isn't building, and instead is deteriorating, then it doesn't work very well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I see that with coaching, leadership teams in startups, or coaching individuals in startups as well. That relationship is critical, to your point, for success. It's also critical for getting the advice to land correctly, right? Because they have to believe, the other party has to believe that you have their best interest. Yeah,
I think there's often a presumption that the lawyer, if you bring the lawyer into the conversation, it's going to make it harder. It's going to slow things down. They're going to get in the way. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, kind of thing. And, being mindful of, professional ethical duties, et cetera, it's the client's decision largely. I'm not driving the boat. But I can say, hey, there's a reef over there, and I would probably, turn this way,
steer left
back into the channel. But if you run into the rocks, I'll help you rebuild the boat. Mm-hmm. It's really, they are in control, and the more they know that I'm there not to be a roadblock, not to tell them that everything they want to do is a problem, the more they're willing and eager to get my input on certain things, because it's just that it's very rare that it's a black and white. You can't do that.
Right.
and there are other situations. There's fiduciary duty responsibilities, there's honoring contracts, there's things that I won't go on board with. But
Right.
generally, if it's a business decision that has potential legal implications or, certainly, risky business implications, my job is to identify those and to make sure that the team is going in eyes open and they make the decision.
Well, and I'm glad how you pointed out that sometimes people will look at lawyers or legal advice as sort of a slap on the hand, right? And that's not always necessarily so. I found in my experience, whenever I've had to, either get legal counsel or go get the advice of legal counsel for anything that I've done, whether it's in my businesses, in my personal life, family, whatever, you know, what Charlie's saying is absolutely correct. Typically a good lawyer or a lawyer that's worth their weight will offer you a suite of options. We'll say these are the outcomes based upon the options that are available to you. Dealer's choice. What do you want to do?
Right.
And then it's kicked back into your court. I think fundamentally, for startups, that relationship tends to work a little bit better. You already talked about that, but I also tend to think that it makes the startup founder feel more empowered because they're making decisions all the time anyway, right? So it's not just a legal decision; it's also a regulatory one, then a financial one, then a marketing one, then a sales one, then a personnel one, and then they're back in the rotation again. And that's all could be happening within an hour, in that particular founder environment. And so there's the great challenge there is to kind of get out of that founder's way, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a slight at founders of early companies, particularly those doing it for the first time. But it seems obvious, but it's often not. And that is the very fact that you don't know what you don't know. And if you've never run a company, if you've never been on a board of directors before, you can very easily brush off responsibilities and obligations that you didn't know you had, and some of those are difficult to fix. And all of a sudden you find someone, I'm just, I was the creator of this product, I run the company. What do I can do whatever I want. And when you get to a certain point, particularly when you have outside investors, you have a great responsibility to do what's not only in what you think is the best interest of the company, but on behalf of those stakeholders as well. And so typically, it only takes a couple of those, oh crap, I have to do what, or I have to, think about, these factors, where it's like, we better, let's bring Charlie into the conversation and make sure there aren't any, hidden gotchas here that we can identify, before we step into the poop. It's like, so it kind of comes back to the same thing, that having this level of trust that I'm not there to, just to burn time and rack up fees, but that even a quick conversation could save them from, a potential, if not nightmare, a thorny situation that they're going to have to then pay more fees to extract themselves from. And sometimes it's as simple as structuring the company in the beginning. How are you awarding equity? When do you award equity? Following certain steps is critically important, particularly in the beginning. And as you onboard folks and grow the company, how you compensate them, for example, thinking about tax consequences, what awarding tons of options can do to the cap table. There's just myriad examples that I could come up with, but you don't know what you don't know. And not that I know everything, but if I don't know, then I'm going to find the person that does, and we'll figure it out together.
Join the GrowthCraft startup community online via Zoom each first Tuesday of the month at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time for Expert Tuesdays. With Expert Tuesdays, you'll hear from one of our top-notch expert advisors and thought leaders in an informative workshop or presentation focusing on a topic important to emerging and growing companies. From sales and marketing to storytelling and leadership, in this hour-long monthly session, you will be able to connect with the GrowthCraft community, advisors, founders, and others. and you'll learn entrepreneurship skills you can apply to your startup project right now. Check out the links to the GrowthCraft website to join us on Expert Tuesdays in the show notes below the podcast player you're listening to right now. And thanks.
I think it's the most appreciated version of the legal field, which is that risk mitigation, right? It's like trying to get you to see some foresight in your decision-making process. It's one of my favorite things to talk to. It's like, so if I go this route, what are the pros and cons? And you tell me the pros and cons, and then I go, okay, what if I go this route, pros and cons? Now I'm making a way more informed decision versus, and the fact that I'm asking you those questions give you indication as to, again, to your point, how do you advise me the next version of this, the next, because of the way you saw my thought process, you already have some sort of guidance that's coming down the pipe for me because of that relationship built. So I want to take a little bit of a turn here, and get. So it seems to be that's the way, Hassan, right? So you ask him all the legal questions, I ask him all the personal questions.
There you
go. We're good with that. But I want to know more about why GrowthCraft, right? So let's talk a little bit about your involvement with GrowthCraft. Considering you're on the GrowthCraft podcast, we might as well talk about that, right?
Sure.
But what prompted you? What got you involved, and what keeps you involved? Like what about GrowthCraft do you love or hate, or what has attracted you, and why you're still there?
Sure. Well, the startup community, emerging company space is somewhat unique. There are tons of companies popping up every day, all over the country, in more places than people suspect. It's no longer just a, Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley kind of deal. But you need to be somewhat plugged in, to kind of keep up with, trends, with, meeting new clients, other potential advisors. And GrowthCraft is a somewhat unique platform that, solves or fills a lot of those needs. It's a curated group of vetted, experienced advisors that are all looking to collaborate or collaboratively assist startups in their mission and their path forward. And so part of it's being able to get to know and trust and tap those other professional advisors in situations where a client has a need, again, whether it be accounting or valuation or tax, etc. So building those relationships and having those advisors at the ready is very important to me. And part of it's giving back too. A lot of folks that come into GrowthCraft are either thinking about starting a company or are on the very, very early stages, and they haven't made the commitment either to take the step to incorporate or to bring in a founder. And it's sort of like, what does all this look like? And, giving some high level advice and often encouragement, to the community it feels good, and you're building credibility along the way. So for me, it's a platform to meet both fellow advisors, prospective clients, but even if they don't end up being clients, it's kind of it's a way to positively impact the space, I think, and to to kind of grow my brand as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, when we think about how GrowthCraft has developed both as a community and as a platform, and as we are moving into, we just talked about this a couple episodes ago, but as we move into other spaces in 2024, we explore other options for members, it's going to become even more critical to have the types of relationships, the types of context for relationships that you're talking about, and the types of advisors and consultants that are going to be able to help these folks be the best. Well, not even be the best, have the best outcomes that they possibly can, whatever that may mean for them for their startup project.
So very interesting for me too, because a lot of times, we'll host forums or gatherings, and being involved in the conversations with multiple founders at once to hear their perspective on things and their lessons learned is additional experience, and it's very interesting to me as well. The way different teams tackle different problems, how they, whether it be internal relationships or, sourcing the right, folks to develop their technology. Often it's a very productive way for everybody in the group to kind of learn something or offer a referral or a lesson learned. So
typically at this point on the show, I have one other question. Tom, you got any other thoughts you want to lay out there before I
No, I think I'm pretty good. I think we can wrap it up a little bit.
All right. So yeah, typically our wrap-up question here. We typically ask folks, advisors and founders alike, what would you like to promote today, if anything? Or how can people check you out? How can people get a hold of you? Do you have a website built? We know you're kind of in the startup stage yourself. So where can people get a hold of you if they want to connect with Charlie Pascal?
Sure. So website is still being built. I will hopefully have an announcement on LinkedIn or and on GrowthCraft, of course, soon to launch that. I want to make sure it's in good shape and it represents what I'm offering and me to the world. But in the meantime, email and phone, I guess, are the best. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Just look up, there aren't too many Charlie Pascals, but my email is charlie@pascaladvisory.com. And my telephone is 203-280-3252.
And if you don't remember any of that, you're at GrowthCraft. So just check them out on GrowthCraft.
I'm on GrowthCraft.
We'll be happy to make that connection for you.
Absolutely. Join the GrowthCraft community. We'll be happy to get you connected to Charlie Pascal. And of course, we will have all the links to all the places where you can find Charlie in the show notes below the player of this podcast episode that you're listening or watching right now. Once again, I'd like to thank Charlie Pascal for coming on the GrowthCraft podcast today. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
And with that, we're out. Each second Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join GrowthCraft live and in person at Second Thursdays at CIC, located at 1 Broadway, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Located at Kendall Square, CIC features the most engaging entrepreneurial community in the Northeast, right next to MIT and minutes from Harvard University and downtown Boston. With 250,000 square feet of professionally managed flexible workspace, CIC has every office amenity you could possibly need to scale your startup project. For those of you who are local, or if you're just visiting Boston, GrowthCraft advisors and founders can meet others in our community face-to-face. Join us for an informal social and informational get-together. Meet others, chat with advisors and peers, make connections, and then stay for Venture Cafe, starting at 4:30 p.m. Eastern every second Thursday at CIC. Check out the links to the GrowthCraft website to join us live and in person at Second Thursdays at CIC in the show notes below the podcast player you're listening to right now. And thanks.